and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. This week, we've got part 2 of our deep dive into 3D face mapping with FaceTech's Senior Vice President of North American Operations, Mr. Jay Meier. This is going to pick up right where we left off at the end of part 1. So if you haven't heard that yet, please go ahead and listen to that one first before continuing. Things get even more interesting this week, so it's especially important to make sure that you have the scientific and technological foundations that Jay laid out for us in the previous episode. And if you're up to speed now, here we go.
So think about 3D for a second. This is why 3D is conceptually way better, right? Because 3D doesn't struggle with the perspective distortions. If it works well, you get the same relationships between geographic locations on your face from any image from image to image that you capture, because it's none of those factors change, right? And 3D, because it captures so much data and so much reliable data that is not distorted with, does not suffer from perspective distortions, it doesn't have to look for other information like color and hue. So I'm not saying that our system doesn't look for color and hue, okay? It just doesn't have to use that as a primary method of determining if these faces match.
Due to a lack of data, it doesn't have to rely on even more unreliable data to round everything out.
Exactly. So 3D in and of itself, intrinsically, will work better than 2D, everything else constant, okay, for those two reasons. Some 2D works better than other 2D, right? But everything else constant, 3D will always perform better than 2D for those reasons.
Right? Yeah, and I guess in the context of matching, like if you're matching to a 2D photo, it doesn't matter that the photo is 2D because your 3D image can be like positioned computationally to be like, yeah, at this distance, this matches this 2D photo. Am I making any sense?
Yeah. So let's get into what our system does, because you're tracking, okay? If you've ever used the FaceTech user interface, you'll see that there are two ovals. You're going to log on to your bank account or log on to your Tinder account, Alex. And oh, wait, was it Tony? I don't remember. One of you got. Okay.
Our girlfriends don't listen to this podcast, so you can just pick either one.
The Christian dating app. I don't care which one. So you're logging on to whatever service provider that you're trying to get access to. And if they're using our interface, an oval shows up and you fill the oval with your face, right? And then the oval gets bigger and you fill the oval with your face again, right? Well, how do you do that? The only way to do that is by moving the camera closer to your face, okay? So we are intentionally creating variability in the depth of field, only we are doing it in a consistent way across all the faces, right? Mm-hmm. So then what? What our system does is capture video frames, right? Well, you move that device roughly 5-6 inches closer to your face. Our system is capturing over 100 video frames of your face, okay? It's like 100 selfies from 100 different distances from the camera, right? As you're moving it closer, it's 100 selfies and 100 different distances from the face to the camera, right? So think of it that way. More data is better than less data. If they're using one image against one image, and we're using 100 images against one image, what's the likelihood that ours is going to have a higher confidence? It's going to have a higher confidence. That's just because it has that much more opportunities to measure and create assurances. But that's not all that our system does. Our system, the AI, and this is where the super geek part comes in. I figured this out in 2016 when I was first introduced to the company, and I still get freaked out about it. Okay. What the AI is actually doing when it moves when it prompts you to move the camera closer to your face, it's capturing those video frames. What is it measuring? It's measuring the change in the perspective distortions.
Huh.
Think about that.
Hmm.
It's measuring the changes in the perspective distortions as you move the camera, as you take 100 selfies between 6 inches and 1 inch, or 12 inches and 6 inches away from your face.
Right.
You understand?
Yep.
So the AI then is able to determine curvatures of the face and three-dimensionality from the delta of the perspective distortions. That's what our system does. It doesn't actually measure a face like you normally think of a face. Our system measures the changes in the perspective distortions, because guess what? The cameras always distort the same way. It's a function of depth of field and the two-dimensionality of the sensor, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's consistent. What's not consistent is the depth of field, right? But your face creates perspective distortions that are unique to your face because it's unique. You understand? Your face generates perspective distortions over those 100 frames that are different than my face generates over those 100 frames, because the variable is the shape of the face. It's no longer the distance between the face and the camera. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it turns out that the perspective distortions are basically a biometric. It's a new biometric.
Yeah.
And that's why they can't really measure our stuff, is because we have to have live capture so that we can force them to move the camera 5 or 6 inches closer to their face, so we can capture all those video frames, so we can measure the perspective distortions. From those perspective distortions, our AI is able to generate, it's not literally a 3D composite, but it generates consistent and reliable three-dimensional data about the face. Okay. It's not creating a three-dimensional mask of your face, or like the pin, thing or whatever. It doesn't do that, but it generates consistent and extraordinarily reliable data about the three-dimensionality of your face.
Mm-hmm.
Follow?
Yeah,
So,
but that's still usable when you're comparing to a 2D image. Like it's not, you say
yeah.
it's like a different biometric, but it's still one that can be equivalenced to the 2D data.
The AI is so good that it can kind of predict what the face should look like, what the
Right.
perspective distortion should be at a particular distance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So it may not be perfectly interchangeable with two-dimensionality, but we're capturing so much more data and so much more reliable data with the 3D face scan and then ultimately the face map, that we still are measuring more data, right? The potential match accuracy is much higher with 3D to 2D than 2D to 2D.
Mm-hmm.
So intrinsically, that's why 3D is superior. We have two eyes in our head, so our brain can triangulate three-dimensionality, right? So we don't bump into stuff, right? We have to be able to interpret 3D data accurately. That's what our system does, and it does it in a very, very unique way. So we have a lot of intellectual property around the user interface, two ovals, right? Because that is the only way we can figure out to capture 100 different video frames in a very controlled environment. Make sense?
Is that also the liveness check is the movement, or is that like a separate mechanism?
Well, it's both. It's all of the above. Okay. So, there's only two vendors that I'm aware of that have a real viable market capable three-dimensional face system. And that's the Face ID in Apple's iPhones, right? What that does is it has a special sensor in the phone that projects 60,000 beams of infrared light on your face. You can't see it, but the other special sensor, or that they have a special projector that projects 60,000 beams of infrared light on your face. And then they have a special sensor that can see the infrared light and including the distances of the light beams.
Mhm.
So it literally is like when you put your face in a screen of pins or whatever, and your creepy face image emerges on the other side, Well,
Yeah.
yours might be creepy. Mine's creepy.
They're all creepy.
Okay, but that's effectively what Apple's system does, right? Our system, and you have to have the Apple iPhone with those two pieces of technology built in order to do Face ID, right? Well, guess what? That costs a lot more money. It works really good. It works really, really well. Okay. But you pay for it. That's why an iPhone costs $1,500 today, and an almost equivalent Samsung is $750. I mean, that part of that is this technology. You can't ask the world to standardize on patented technology that Apple owns, right? So that's a problem. What we really need is a biometric face matcher that is capable of using the two-dimensional sensors that are in any phone. And that's what ours does. We capture so much information with our 3D system that our software, our system will work on almost any device. I think we estimated one time that if you go measure let me put it a different way. The resolution of the cameras have changed a lot over time, right? Well, a lot of these, a lot of guys, when they go get their face matching system tested, they kind of hope you don't notice, but they only use the most modern iPhone, right? Because it has this super incredible camera in it, right? Is that realistic? No, because only about 30% of the global population uses an iPhone at all. And half of those don't have the face matching thing, right? Our system only needs 0.3 megapixels. That's the resolution of the camera, the minimum resolution that our system needs in order to capture enough data to be accurate enough. Okay. And when I say accurate enough, I mean like 1 in 2 million false accept rate, not 1 in 10,000, which is the benchmark at all the NIST tests. You want to know why the benchmark is so low? They had a false reject rate of 1%. You got to have a 1 in 10,000 false accept rate. That's written into the new draft of 800-63. That's a low that's a very high false accept rate compared to ours, which is, in a similar circumstance, more like 1 in 2 million, right? So that's because of three-dimensionality. And that includes 3D to 2D images. So that when Service New South Wales doesn't save biometric data, it's against the law for them to save the biometric data. They already have images of your face in their driver's license database, right? Like that's not biometric data, but it's just old biometric data. So what they do is they capture the three-dimensional face scan that our system captures, which is liveness data and matching data captured concurrently from the same sensor. Okay. So and then it transmits that to behind their firewall where liveness is checked. And if this is deemed to be a live person, they match our 3D face map, which doesn't include the liveness data, against the 2D image that's there. And it either matches or it doesn't, right? Either way, they delete the 3D face map. They don't save any of that information. So they get the benefit of our liveness and the benefit of our matching without having to compromise their laws and regulations about face matching data and saving it in a database. Okay.
And I think you had mentioned last week too that the data that is left over after they delete the face map is useless. It can't be resubmitted. So even
Well,
if
yeah,
even if they lost everything or it was stolen,
right.
there would be no use for it.
Well, and that's a critical selling feature in our view. What that regards is what's called honeypot risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
What Service New South Wales was trying to mitigate was the potential for a hacker to get into that database and steal biometric template data, right? And presumably, if you listen to the guys at Fido and you listen to the guys at Apple and all those other places, they'll tell you that if anybody gets a hold of biometric template data that is something having to do with your face, your life is over. You can't do anything ever again. That's, and that's why they say, well, that's why we do the face matching on the device only. And that's why we don't bind identity data to the face matching biometric, because even if they steal it, they won't know whose it is. I mean, it's nonsense. Cryptography works really well. Okay. So we send biometric data through the internet. We encrypt it 6 ways from Sunday. We send it from the device to the server behind Service New South Wales firewall, which is the safest place in the network you can put something like that, right? Liveness is tested, and if liveness is affirmed, the system deletes a bunch of liveness data. Okay? So remember that our system, first thing it does, the SDK, is take control of the sensor, the camera, and the data feed from it, right? That's so we can mitigate against deepfake injection attacks, right? It's pretty rudimentary and simple. If you can show that the only data you are using came from this particular camera, then you know that something that can't show that it came from that camera might have been injected into the flow, and you can delete the whole transaction, right? That's the primary method of mitigating deepfake injection attacks, is to get control of the biometric sensor and the data flow from it, so you know exactly what data you should have and exactly how that data should exist, right? And if the characteristics aren't there, or there's other characteristics that wouldn't normally be there, data has been injected, so you can shut the whole thing down. Okay, so that's what you do first. Because it's one camera, and because of the 3-dimensionality, we can capture liveness data and matching data at the same time. It's basically the same data. It's one data file that we call a face scan. It's all of this 3-dimensional data and some other data that's collected about liveness, right? That is interwound with all the matching data. It's one file we call a face scan. Okay. And there's other stuff that, if you think about 3-dimensionality, here's another reason 3D is better than 2D. And a lot of the 2D guys are trying to show that they can do 3D now in some way for the liveness, but they can't. The NIST tests show that none of them do it very well. A human face must be 3-dimensional to be a human face. If it's not 3D, it's not a human face. So we're not really testing in the liveness sense. We're not really testing for 3-dimensionality. We're testing for something that's not 3-dimensional, right? If it's 3D, it's not 2D. Well, conversely, if it's 2D, it cannot be a human face, right? So think about all the presentation attacks that people have been worried about. They put a picture up to the camera, right? They hold a high def screen up to the camera, right? If it's not a mask, if it's not a physically 3-dimensional presentation attack, our system will veto it immediately, because we'll know it's 2D and therefore can't be a living human being, right? So then you get into other things about, like a mask. And there's another company out there that keeps posting stuff about super masks, that cost $5,000 or whatever, and it dupes all of these things. Well, only if you're measuring if the only thing you measure is 3-dimensionality, then those masks will work. We'll get through the liveness. But if you measure what we call passive liveness characteristics, and what we call passive is different than what NIST calls passive. Okay. I can explain that if you want. But what we call passive liveness characteristics are involuntary human cues. And a perfect example is how your pupils dilate under different conditions, right? You have no control over that. You can't make your pupil dilate. The only way your pupils dilate is if more or less light, is hitting your retina or whatever, right? And that's a control to control how much light gets into your eye, right? It's involuntary. Your body does it and you don't even know it. And there's a bunch of other involuntary human cues, a really poor one, which AI could probably spoof. So I'm just throwing it out there, guys. When you move your camera closer to your face, your eyes have a tendency to focus on something that's closer. And so they go a little bit more cross-eyed. That's an easy one, right? So don't worry about that one. But we have 70 or more of these involuntary human cues that our system watches in addition to the three-dimensionality, right?
Mhm.
And we don't tell anybody what they are. I don't even know what they are. It's under lock and key. And that's so if I told everybody that all you have to do is, show the eyes focusing on something closer, then that's what they'd attack. Okay, our AI is going to do that,
Right.
Well, the thing is they have to have the same 70 measurements, and the same 70 measurements have to be in the same order.
Mhm.
The resolutions have to be the same. And guess what? When you're in control of the sensor, you can change the resolution of the data that it captures, right? There's so much randomness there that attackers don't know what to attack to defeat our liveness. That's why our liveness is so much better than anything out there. It's 3D, which means it's not 2D, which is a layup, right? Presentation attacks largely are gone, and we use 70 or more involuntary human cues that no one knows what they are, so they don't know what to attack. How would you concoct a liveness attack on our system, even if you knew what the 70 measurements were? What order would you put them in?
Mhm.
What would the resolution be? Anything that's not what we expect is a spoof attack, remember? So
This
we
is
do.
why Tony and I are having so much trouble getting your spoof bounty. Like we've been trying, and
Really?
we can't figure out, first of all, how to make a mask. Uh,
You can
I,
buy
c-
them.
I couldn't find the website for the spoof bounty at first, so that was a bit of a hurdle.
Oh, well, let me help you. It's www.spoofbounty.com.
Thank you, Jay. Now,
SPOOFBOUNTY.com.
all
That's
right,
our spoof
Alex.
bounty program.
Now we're cooking.
now we're cooking. Now
All
we're in
right. So,
business.
You're in trouble,
you
Jim.
you and 150,000 other attacks have failed. Okay.
Mhm.
Net 150,000. We've had 150,000 distinct attacks on that. We paid out twice when we started it in 2019. As I understand it, the payout was a partial payout because the attacker got part way in. We don't give you 600,000 if you just get part way in. You can get, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, or whatever it is, right? The total you could get is 600. No one's ever gotten more than the first layer. And of course, part of the deal is that we make you sign a contract that says that we can use whatever information we gather to improve our stuff.
Mhm.
So it's
Right.
great R&D, right?
Yeah.
We haven't had a breach in the spoof bounty program since 2019, and it works pretty damn well. So anyway, you understand why 3D and in addition, some other types of involuntary human cues, passive liveness is far and away better than that what 2D stuff. They're trying to do 3D by like turning your head, if you turn your head, we can show that it's because they're hoping that the AI thing shows like no head, I mean, it's not this nice try. Okay. But it ain't going to work that well. So anyway, same sensor, we control the sensor, we control the data flow from it. So we protect against deepfake injection attacks, right?
Mhm.
If data in the data flow is different than what we can predict, what we know should be there, it means there's something there that shouldn't be there, which means we cut it off. It's done. No, the attack will not be successful. Because it's one sensor, we capture liveness data and matching data at the same time. It's effectively the same data. It's all 3D, and we talked about why 3D is better in matching. We talked about why 3D is better in liveness, right? We then encrypt it. And for all you guys that worship at the altar of deterministic cryptography, I'm going to say it one more time. I love cryptography. You have to use cryptography, guys. Everybody needs to use cryptography. If you don't, you're going down in a hurry. Okay. Just so we're clear, crypto guys, we encrypt the 3D face scan. The face scan is 3D matching data and liveness data. I like to say all wound together into a single file. All right. We encrypt it 6 ways from Sunday. We beam it behind the firewall where the source data is, the verified identity profile is, where the image is, or other biometric data that's already been captured, right? The first thing we do is decrypt it once it's behind the firewall. And if you think, why is the firewall better? Because you have absolute control of everything behind your firewall. You don't have absolute control of everything that's in the cloud that you rented part of, along with a million other companies that rent part of the same cloud, and why the cloud is not considered as secure. IDV vendors, if you're doing a SaaS model in the cloud, that's a problem. It's going to be a bigger problem for you. We move the data behind the firewall. We check for liveness. We examine some of the liveness data. And if this is determined to be a living human being, then we delete the liveness data. Okay. Remember, it was one file. Think of it as one data packet, right? Liveness data and matching data together. We have now deleted liveness data. We have literally altered the file.
Mhm.
We've changed it. Okay. Has completely different characteristics. It lacks a ton of characteristics that the face scan has. We call what's left the 3D face map. And the 3D face map is really just matching data, which that is what is bound to the verified identity profile. So we have a 3D biometric representation of your face, which then we can match against later because we know it's the face that belongs to that identity because they're bound together. The face map is bound to the identity profile, or it's matched against the 2D image. So if we're matching 3D against the 3D face map that's already there, that we collected when you enrolled, more data, 3D versus 3D is way more data, right? Accuracy level goes way up. Theoretically, at a 1% false reject rate, we could have a false accept rate of 1 in 124 million. Notice I said theoretically. We've never been able to prove that. There isn't a real world example. So all you other vendors that say, oh, that's not real, it's just in the lab. That's true. It's theoretical, right? But the theoretical possibility of your 2D matcher isn't even close to the possibility of ours, right? So 3D to 3D is as good as you can get. 3D to 2D is still a lot more data being compared than 2D to 2D, which we already talked about, right? They can delete the biometric data or keep it. That's a policy issue, right? So what's the advantage of collecting one data file, right? There's a number of advantages. It gives you control of what that file should be and the characteristics of that file. But remember, when we delete the liveness data, we are literally altering the data. We're altering the file, right? It's different. This goes back to your honeypot thing that you asked about. So let's just a hypothetical example, right? Let's say the file was originally written in English, okay? Uses the English language. And then when it's sent behind the file then changes to Japanese. So someone steals the Japanese document and they try and submit it to the system that's trying to read English. What would happen? Error. That's what happens when you alter the biometric file too. When you delete the liveness data, we change the data that's in the file. We change the file completely. But if somebody steals that and try and resubmit it, it doesn't have the proper characteristics. It doesn't have the required characteristics, and our system would just say, error, this does not compute,
Mhm.
right? So it can't be used. So why would anybody steal it? So there is no, let's say that we significantly mitigate the honeypot risk. And there's other ways to do that. There's a couple other things. Encryption is a biggie. If you make the data unusable by encrypting it, we made the data unusable by changing the file. You can make the data unusable by encrypting it. Again, cryptography is essential. It's a good idea. So we think our system is fantastically productive compared to other systems, for all the reasons I've talked about over the last half a dozen episodes. Starts with moving the biometric data, right? Starts with capturing the sensor and protecting against deepfake injections. Then capturing, matching, and face data, three-dimensional matching and liveness data concurrently, so it's one file, right? Advantages of 3D over 2D are pretty self-evident, okay? 3D liveness over other liveness is also self-evident, right? Send it behind the firewall so that it can be matched against the verified stored value that you already know belongs to the guy that's represented by the identity file behind the firewall, right? Other guys don't do that. It's a big deal. That's the basis of the PKI fallacy. But here's one thing you got to know. If you don't move the biometric data to the database of identities, you can't match that biometric data against all of the other biometric data in the database. You can't do a one-to-many match. And by moving the biometric data to the database and binding it to a verified identity profile, you have a complete description of this person now. And you can take that face data and you can match it against all of the other face data stored in the database. And you can do it anonymously so nobody has to get all upset, right? If there's two accounts with the same face, the system will tell you if there's more than one account with the same face. Well, what does that mean? If there's more than one account with the same face, it could be the same name and address and phone number. It could be just a duplicate account, right? And the bank or whoever doesn't want to have two duplicate accounts. That creates inefficiencies and problems for them down the road, right? So they can merge them or delete one or whatever it is and really improve their system. But you also could have the same face on different files that are under a different name. What if that happens?
That's fraud.
That's fraud, right? So you delete both of them, right?
Yeah.
So now think about that. I like to say you're cleaning the database. Okay. You can get rid of the duplicity. You can get rid of the fraudulent files, and our customers are using this to the max. Okay. It's a big, big, big deal. I'm not kidding. They love it because they don't know who's in their database. Jamie Dimon, chairman and CEO of JP Morgan, said publicly on CNBC like a year and a half ago, we have no idea who our account owners are. We have no idea who's in control of these accounts. So now you get a sense of how you can clean that database of bad entries and lower the risk profile of your business, right? Once it's clean, you have a much higher quality identity verification on the new entrants, right? Which means you can have more confidence in the data you're collecting from a new customer. And you overall raise the integrity of the quality of the data in the database. The risk to the enterprise goes way down. So if your guys aren't moving their biometric data to the verified identity data somewhere, you need to get a new vendor because that is critically important in today's world.
Well, I mean, just to bring it all back to the UR code, the reason that you want to emphasize all these unique things about FaceTech, I guess partly is that the UR code is vendor agnostic. So, I mean, nobody has to use
Liveness vendor agnostic.
Yeah. So like nobody needs to use FaceTech's liveness technology. They could use someone else. But you're making a good case.
Well, exactly. So think about this. This is the main point of the UR code. Remember, we move biometric data to the database. There's all these fake IDs. There's all this. Your identity data is out there on the dark web. We don't know who's in control of your identity data, which means we don't know who's representing themselves as you. We have almost no way to tell. So we move the biometric data to the database because there's all this bad information, fake IDs and stolen legitimate identity data out there. We can't trust the identity data that's presented anymore. And because of the PKI fallacy, we cannot trust that we know who's in control of the device that the newfangled cryptographically secured credentials are bound to, right? That's what verifiable credentials and mobile driver's licenses, and that's what they solve for is the integrity of the data, right? It's a perfect representation of what's behind the firewall at the DMV or at the State Department or whatever, right? Because that information is the only information we can trust, but it's behind the firewall. In order to use it, traditionally, you would have had to move biometric data behind their firewall. You'd have to move biometric data to a government resource who can then potentially track you or find out that you're opening another account at Tinder or whatever, right? So the privacy people have a big problem with that. They do. And it's a problem for us. It holds us back, right? Holds the whole industry back. So the mobile driver's license, for example, takes all that driver's license data and moves it into the control of the consumer. And it does it in a pretty good way. Well, it's kind of a cumbersome way, but it's pretty good, right, for what it does. But what it doesn't do is verify that the holder of the device that the credential is bound to is the same person represented by the mobile driver's license. There's virtually no way to do that. The only way it does it is it has a picture so somebody can look at the picture and then look at your face and say, oh, I guess that's pretty good. It's the same strategy that we've been using for ages. And that's how a lot of people learned how to buy beer underage, right? Because that's the same vector. So what the UR code does is the data is extracted from the issuing authority, the DMV or whoever. It's the same data that's in the mobile driver's license. Same data, exact. It's not changed. There's nothing changed. Same exact data. Okay. Same picture, same biometric data, same identity data. But it's in a different type of container. Okay. It's in a 2D barcode that is a lot easier to use, a lot less expensive to use, a lot less cumbersome. And we can take that 2D barcode and digitally sign it. If you guys remember that's cryptography.
Yeah.
Digital signatures guarantee the integrity of the barcode and the data in it. And they also tell you who issued it. So it's the right state. That's what a digital key, that's what the asymmetric key pairs do. But the UR code can't be adulterated that way, can't be changed. The same way that a mobile driver's license or a verifiable credential cannot be altered, the UR code can't be altered. But it's so light and efficient. You can beam it around. It's free. We're giving it to the issuing authorities so they can give it to their citizens and their consumers and their identity owners. And then it's in the control of the identity owner. You don't have to ping the government database in order to confirm that this guy is the guy represented by the identity in the mobile driver's license or something else. So it satisfies the privacy concerns. That's why we're pretty excited. There's a lot. I mean, here's an update. We actually have paying customers now that are using the UR codes.
That's
Oh,
great.
wow.
That was fast.
Yeah.
Pretty fast.
Yeah.
It works real good. Works real good. And we're going to have some more soon. Some of these customers are big customers. For me, resident economist and Wall Street blood-sucking analyst, the fact that we're getting paid as a result of the UR codes is meaningful.
Yeah.
The fact that we're getting paid as a result of UR codes only a couple, 3 months after we released them is amazingly meaningful, right? And it's only going to get better from here. It's catching on. The fire is lit, it's not Jimmy John's franchise restaurateur in Toronto. Okay. This is international. So very, very exciting. We are going full throttle, full ahead. And we think that QR code, because we're not asking anybody, it's a protocol, not a product. We think it's going to revolutionize identity management on the internet. It really is that disruptive. That's all I got to say about that.